I was unloading my gear after a 24-hour shift when an HOA Karen stormed up, screaming that my truck was illegally parked. I told her calmly I was a firefighter responding to a nearby emergency, but she didn't care. She called 911 on me anyway, claiming I was impersonating first responders. What she didn't know was that the dispatcher she reached was the same station I just left, and within minutes, half the fire department and a police unit arrived. By the time they finished checking her false report, the HOA Karen learned that abusing emergency services comes with consequences. Fast. The fire engine was still warm when I parked it along the curb. I just finished a 24-hour shift. The kind that leaves your muscles aching and your brain foggy, and I was unloading gear for a quick equipment check before heading home. There had been a brush fire just 2 streets over, and our crew was rotating trucks to stay ready in case the wind shifted. That's when I heard heels clicking behind me. Fast, sharp, angry. "Excuse me," a woman's voice snapped. I turned to see a middle-aged woman in a crisp HOA polo shirt and oversized sunglasses marching straight toward me like she owned the pavement. "You can't park that thing here," she said, pointing at the fire engine. "This is a residential neighborhood." I blinked once. "Ma'am, this is an emergency vehicle. We're on standby for a nearby fire." She crossed her arms. "I don't see any fire." "That doesn't mean there isn't one," she scoffed. "You people always say that." "You people." I kept my voice calm. "We're monitoring a situation. We'll be gone as soon as we're cleared." "Well, you're blocking my view," she said. "And I pay HOA fees to make sure this street stays clear." I looked around. The street was empty. No traffic. No driveways blocked. Just a red fire engine sitting quietly at the curb. "I'll move when dispatch releases us," I said. Her lips tightened. "You're not listening." "I am." "No, you're not. You're being disrespectful." I could feel the familiar tension building, that mix of entitlement and misplaced authority that firefighters deal with more often than people realize. "Ma'am," I said, "I just got off a long shift. I'm not here to argue. We're responding to a potential emergency." She pulled out her phone. "Then you won't mind me calling 911, she said smugly. "We'll let them sort it out." I froze for half a second. "You're going to call 911 on a fire engine?" She smiled like she'd just won. "You're impersonating emergency services. I've seen fake trucks before." Behind me, my partner muttered, "Oh no." She hit dial. "I'd like to report an unauthorized emergency vehicle blocking a residential street," she said loudly. "Yes, it's red and says, Fire Department, but anyone can paint that." I pinched the bridge of my nose. The dispatcher's voice came faintly through her speaker. "Ma'am, are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure," she snapped. "Send the police immediately." She ended the call and folded her arms again, satisfied. "There," she said. "Now we'll see who's telling the truth." I didn't say a word, because I knew exactly who had just received that call. The same dispatch center that handled my radio. 30 seconds later, my pager chirped. "False report. Fire engine at Maple and Ridge. Stand by." My partner looked at me, grinning. She really did it. The woman saw my reaction and smirked. "What's wrong? Getting nervous?" "No," I said. "Just waiting." "For what?" "For backup." A minute later, the first police cruiser turned onto the street. Then another. And behind them a second fire engine. Her confident posture wavered. "What is all this?" she demanded. The lead officer stepped out. "We got a 911 call about an impersonating emergency vehicle." She pointed straight at me. "That's him. He parked illegally and refused to leave." The officer looked at the fire engine, then at my uniform, then at the department insignia. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "this is a real fire truck." She frowned. "That's what he wants you to think." The second fire engine pulled up behind us, lights flashing. The battalion chief stepped out. "What's going on?" he asked. The woman hesitated for the first time. The officer turned to her. Did you make a false emergency call? No, she said quickly. I was protecting the neighborhood. The chief looked at me. We just came from that brush fire. Wind's picking up again. I nodded. That's why we're here. The woman's face started to pale. Ma'am, the officer said, misusing 911 is a serious offense. But he's a firefighter, the officer cut in. On duty. Her mouth opened, closed. That means you just called emergency services on emergency services. The realization hit her like a slap. And the regret? It was only just beginning. The HOA Karen was still standing there when the second fire engine shut off its siren. Her confidence had melted into tight, nervous silence. The clipboard she'd been gripping now hung uselessly at her side as the battalion chief walked toward her, eyes scanning the scene with the calm authority of someone who'd handled far worse than an angry homeowner. Who made the 911 call? He asked. She raised her chin. I did. Someone parked an unauthorized emergency vehicle on our street. The chief looked at the engine. Then at me. Then back at her. This truck, he said slowly, belongs to my department. This firefighter, he nodded toward me, was on active duty. Her lips pressed together. That's not what he said. I told you exactly that, I replied. The police officer stepped closer. Ma'am, misuse of 911 is a criminal offense. You reported an emergency that didn't exist. I was just trying to keep our neighborhood safe, she protested. The HOA has rules about parking. HOA rules do not override emergency services, the officer replied. The woman's voice wavered. So what happens now? The officer took out a small notepad. Now I need your ID. Her eyes widened. For what? For filing a false report. She hesitated just long enough to make it worse. The chief glanced at her. If you don't provide it, we'll have to escort you. With shaking hands, she pulled her wallet from her purse. While the officer wrote down her information, a few neighbors began gathering on their porches, drawn by the cluster of flashing lights. Whispers rippled through the street. That's Marlene from the HOA. She called the cops on a fire truck? No way. Her face flushed bright red. I want to speak to someone in charge, she snapped. You're looking at them, the chief said calmly. The officer finished writing. Ma'am, you are being cited for misuse of emergency services. This carries a fine and a court date. A court date, she gasped. Over a phone call? Over abusing 911, he replied. Which diverts resources from real emergencies. As if on cue, the radio on the fire engine crackled. Brush fire has flared again. Crews needed. The chief turned to me. You're up. I climbed into the cab as my partner started the engine. The HOA woman stared at me, disbelief in her eyes. You're just leaving? Yes, I said. To do my job. The engines roared back to life, rolling away from the curb she'd fought so hard to protect. When I returned hours later, the street was quiet, but the fallout had just begun. A bright orange citation was taped to her front door. The HOA board called an emergency meeting that night, and by morning, a formal apology sat in my inbox from their legal department. Apparently, calling 911 on firefighters wasn't covered under their insurance policy. And Marlene? She learned the hard way that when you dial for help, you better be right. By the next morning, the neighborhood felt different. Not quieter, watchful. As I walked out to my truck, I noticed curtains shifting behind windows, phones held just a little too high. Whispers that stopped the second I turned my head. Marlene hadn't just embarrassed herself. She'd embarrassed the HOA. And HOAs don't take that lightly. I found out how bad it was when a folded notice was wedged into my door. HOA violation, improper use of commercial vehicle. I laughed out loud. They were actually trying to find a fire engine. I walked straight to the HOA office, the same red citation still taped to Marlene's door 2 houses down. She wouldn't even make eye contact as I passed. Inside, the property manager, A thin man with a tight smile sat behind the desk. "You received a violation," he said without looking up. "I'm a firefighter," I replied. "Not a pizza delivery. The HOA prohibits commercial vehicles parked overnight." "That wasn't overnight. That was an emergency response." He slid a laminated rule sheet across the desk. "The HOA has strict policies. So does the city. And the fire department. And the law." He finally looked at me. "The HOA has the authority to enforce community standards. Not over emergency services." He leaned back. "That's not what our legal department says." That was interesting. "So your legal department says you can fine fire trucks now?" He smiled. "We'll let the courts decide." By lunchtime, 3 neighbors had knocked on my door. Not to complain. To apologize. "We had no idea she called 911 on you," one said. "The HOA told us you were threatening residents." "There it is," I muttered. They weren't just trying to cover it up. They were rewriting it. That evening, I got an email blast from the HOA. Subject: Fire Safety Incident Update. It claimed a disruptive individual had brought a suspicious emergency-style vehicle into the neighborhood and that HOA leadership had heroically contacted authorities to ensure resident safety. They never used my name. But everyone knew. I forwarded the email straight to the fire department's legal office. Within an hour, my phone rang. "This is the city attorney," a calm voice said. "We received something from you that the HOA probably wishes they hadn't written." "What happens now?" "They've just publicly accused a municipal fire crew of wrongdoing. That opens them up to liability." "Good." The next day, 2 official vehicles pulled into the HOA lot. 1 city. 1 county. By noon, the HOA president was pale. By 2 p.m., Marlene was called into a closed-door meeting. By 4 p.m., she walked out carrying a box. Neighbors gathered on their porches again. This time, the whispers were louder. She got fired. They blamed her. They had to. The HOA tried to spin it. They sent out another email claiming she'd acted independently and without authorization. But the damage was done. The police report still existed. The fire department logs still existed. And the dispatcher recording of her calling 911 on a real fire truck? That existed too. A week later, Marlene showed up at my door. No sunglasses. No clipboard. Just tired eyes and a forced smile. "They threw me under the bus," she said quietly. "Said it was all my fault." "You made the call," I replied. "They told me to," she snapped. "They said to push back against any outside vehicles. I just didn't know." "You didn't know it was a fire truck?" She looked down. "They won't help me with the fine," she said. "Or the court date. That's how HOAs work." She left without another word. 2 days later, I got a notice from the HOA. All fines rescinded. HOA acknowledges emergency vehicle exemption. Translation: they'd realized they were in trouble. And for the first time since I moved in. They blinked. But the real showdown? That was still coming. The HOA didn't back down. They regrouped. 2 days after Marlene was stripped of her safety title, a notice appeared on every door in the neighborhood. Mandatory compliance inspection, emergency vehicle violations. It was laughable. They couldn't punish the fire department, so they decided to punish me. At exactly 9 a.m., 3 HOA board members marched up my driveway with clipboards and measuring tapes like they were conducting a raid. The president led them, lips tight with forced confidence. "We're here to inspect your property for violations," he announced. "For what?" I asked. "Unauthorized commercial equipment. Hazardous parking. Improper use of emergency access." "You mean the fire engine?" He smiled. "We prefer to call it an unapproved vehicle." I stepped aside and let them look. There was nothing there. No engine. No gear. No trucks. Just my pickup. "You're late," I said. "We already left for another brush fire this morning." His smile vanished. "So you admit it's a regular occurrence?" I admit fires don't follow HOA schedules. He tried to hide his frustration. We're going to fine you for repeated violations. On what grounds? On the grounds that your presence disrupts the neighborhood. That's when I pulled out my phone and started recording. Say that again? He froze. You're trying to fine a firefighter for responding to emergencies. That's not. That's exactly what you're doing. The other board members shifted nervously. You already lost one lawsuit this week, I reminded them. Do you really want another? The president straightened. We have the authority to regulate community standards. And the city has the authority to ignore you. I walked back inside, came out with a single sheet of paper, and handed it to him. It was a letter from the city attorney. Any attempt to restrict or penalize emergency responders will result in immediate legal action. He read it twice, then once more. The color drained from his face. This can't be right, he muttered. Oh, it is, I said. Your insurance carrier got a copy too. That did it. The inspection ended right there. They packed up their clipboards and left without another word. But the real blow landed that afternoon. I got a call from the city. Your HOA just lost their liability coverage, the attorney said. The insurer dropped them. Calling 911 on firefighters and then trying to fine one? That's too much risk. Meaning they're exposed. One lawsuit could wipe them out. By evening, the HOA office was lit up like a war room. Emergency meetings, closed doors, raised voices. They weren't worried about me anymore. They were worried about survival. Marlene, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. I later learned she'd been formally charged. False emergency report. Misuse of 911. Court date set. And she wasn't getting help from the HOA. They'd disowned her. Thrown her away like a burned-out match. The same woman who had once strutted around with a clipboard now avoided everyone's eyes. The neighborhood Facebook group went silent. Nobody wanted to defend the HOA anymore. Not after seeing how far they'd gone. Not after realizing how close they'd come to getting someone hurt. The president sent one last email that night. The HOA regrets the recent misunderstanding and acknowledges the authority of emergency services. Translation? They surrendered. They knew they'd crossed a line. They knew the city, the fire department, and the courts were watching. And they knew that if they pushed any harder, they'd lose everything. But the final consequence? That came the next morning. A sheriff's deputy knocked on Marlene's door. I watched from across the street as she was handed official papers. A court summons. A fine so large it made her sink onto the steps. All because she couldn't handle a fire truck being parked near her house. And because the HOA had backed her instead of stopping her. The neighborhood finally understood something that day. Emergency services don't answer to HOAs. And anyone who tries to use 911 as a weapon finds out the hard way. The war was almost over. And in the end, the HOA had only one move left. Admit defeat. The HOA folded the next day. Not publicly, not yet, but in the quiet, desperate way organizations do when they realize they've stepped into something they can't control. The morning after the sheriff served Marlene her court summons, a black SUV parked outside the HOA office. Two lawyers stepped out. No smiles. No clipboards. Just briefcases and expressions that said damage control. By noon, every board member was inside. By 2, the HOA president sent out a message marked urgent. All enforcement related to emergency vehicles is suspended until further notice. Translation: we're in trouble. But that wasn't the end of it. Around 4 o'clock, my phone rang. Fire Department Legal, the voice said. We need to talk. I sat down. We've obtained the 911 call recording, she continued. Marlene didn't just claim your truck was unauthorized. She told dispatch you were impersonating a firefighter and that you might be a threat. I closed my eyes. That elevates it, she said. False emergency reports are one thing. False criminal accusations are another. What does that mean for her? I asked. It means the district attorney is considering additional charges. The HOA had created a monster, and now it was turning on them. That evening, Marlene tried to do something reckless. She showed up at the fire station. Not to apologize, to complain. She demanded to speak to a supervisor, claiming I had set her up and that the department had intimidated her. They recorded every word. By the time she left, she had unknowingly added obstruction to her growing list of problems. The next morning, a court officer knocked on her door again. This time, it wasn't just a summons. It was a formal charge. False report. Misuse of emergency services. False criminal accusation. And now a potential jail time. The HOA president finally cracked. He called me directly. "We need to make this go away," he said. "You should have thought about that before you let her weaponize 911. She was acting on her own. No. She was acting under HOA authority. And now the city has proof." Silence. "We'll drop all actions against you," he said. "We'll issue a public apology. That's between you and your lawyers." The apology went out that afternoon. So did another message. Marlene is no longer affiliated with the HOA in any capacity. They'd cut her loose. But it was too late. The district attorney moved forward. The neighborhood learned the truth when local news showed up. A camera crew filmed the street where the fire engines had been called. Neighbors were interviewed. So was the fire chief. "This could have delayed life-saving response," he said on air. "Calling 911 on emergency responders is dangerous and illegal." Marlene's face was everywhere. The HOA's name was everywhere. And the story went viral. 2 weeks later, she stood before a judge. No sunglasses. No clipboard. No authority. Just consequences. The court didn't go easy on her. Heavy fines. Mandatory community service. A permanent record. All for a call she could have avoided. The HOA paid too. Their insurance premiums tripled. Their legal fees exploded. Their board president resigned. And every homeowner got a letter explaining exactly why their dues were going up. Because one HOA Karen had decided a fire truck didn't belong on her street. The irony? A month later, another brush fire threatened the neighborhood. This time, when the engines arrived, no one complained. They waved. They brought water. They thanked us. Because everyone finally understood something simple. 911 is not a toy. Emergency services are not HOA employees. And when you try to use the system as a weapon, it fires back. Marlene learned that the hard way. And the HOA? They'll never forget the day they tried to bully a firefighter and ended up burning their own reputation to the ground.